Sri Lanka has declared a state of public emergency. An emergency of this extent is needed when a country is facing a medical disaster, bioterrorist attacks, responding to a calamity or a catastrophic event. But in Sri Lanka, the reason is different. It is this: public anger. Hundreds of protesters held a massive demonstration in the commercial capital of Colombo. This comes a day after people tried to storm the president's house on Thursday. With a severe economic crisis unfolding in the island country, the people demanded Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation. Tear gas and water cannons were used to disperse demonstrators, but people remained undeterred. Protesters dismantled a wall and hurled bricks at the police. They even set a bus alight on the road leading to the president's building. At least 54 people have been arrested. The capital was placed under indefinite curfew, which now stands lifted. After the protesters were dispersed, the president's office released a statement saying that the chaos were organized by extremist groups. It said, and I quote, "Many of those involved in the violence have been arrested and many have been identified as organized extremists. They have spearheaded the protests calling for an Arab Spring in Sri Lanka." Just to remind our viewers, Arab Spring was a movement in early 2010 in West Asia, where common people took to the streets in response to high corruption and economic woes. Sri Lanka's market had the worst weekly fall ever. Losses have extended a fifth straight season. It was a bloodbath at the Colombo Stock Exchange. Dwindling foreign reserves have put pressure on the monetary system. The population of around 22 million is heavily dependent on imports. Most food products and essentials are imported in Sri Lanka. So to import food, Sri Lanka needs foreign currency reserves to pay for them. Currently, the foreign reserves are depleting at an alarming rate. In the last 2 years, foreign reserves have fallen by 70%. Due to India's neighborhood first policy, New Delhi provided Sri Lanka a $2.4 billion package of financial assistance. The island country houses about 3 million Tamils. So the Indian government is mulling over providing humanitarian aid to Sri Lankan Tamils. This is also important for India because many distressed Sri Lankans are coming to the nearest Indian state of Tamil Nadu. This comes ahead of IMF talks with Washington, which are scheduled in April. Until now, the Rajapaksa government had resisted reaching out to the IMF. They preferred bilateral helplines, but individual aid from allies are clearly not enough. The country is facing its biggest economic crisis since independence. After months of economic hardship, the crisis has gone from bad to worse. 12 to 13-hour-long power cuts are common. Fuel is too expensive, and ration lines are getting longer. So how did things get so bad? It is a combination of many factors. Historically, Lankan governments have been weak at fiscal management. President Gotabaya was more of the same. His tax cuts were ill-timed. So was his obsession with making Sri Lanka's agriculture 100% organic. The final nail in the coffin was the COVID-19 pandemic. Sri Lanka's tourism sector is its main source of earning. It accounts for over 10% of the nation's GDP. And like most countries, the pandemic was harsh on Sri Lanka's tourism sector. The entire government in Sri Lanka is controlled by one family, the Rajapaksas. The president is Rajapaksa Gotabaya. The prime minister is his older brother, Mahinda. The finance minister is a third brother, Basir Rohana. The eldest of the Rajapaksa siblings is Chamal, who is the country's home minister. The list does not even end here. There is Namal Rajapaksa, who is the minister of youth and sports. He is the prime minister's son. Then there is Yoshitha, who is the prime minister's chief of staff. Shashindra, Sri Lanka's minister for agriculture. And Shamindra, the director of Sri Lankan Airlines. All in all, the Rajapaksa family holds 9 ministerial berths. This includes 7 cabinet posts in the Sri Lankan government. Currently, they control 75% of Sri Lanka's budget. The same Sri Lanka where there are no exam papers. Streets are going dark. People are queuing up for fuel, and power cuts have become the new normal. This is the family that is responsible for Sri Lanka's doom. To understand their role, let me take you 15 years back. The year was 2007. Mahinda Rajapaksa was Sri Lanka's president, and he took a major policy decision. Colombo began borrowing money. Government bonds were sold in capital markets. 15 years later, that borrowing has not stopped today. These loans account for 38% of Sri Lanka's debt. The loans from China made the situation far worse. Mahinda Rajapaksa was Sri Lanka's president from 2005 to 2015. During this period, China was involved in 70% of all new infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka. It gave at least $14 billion from 2005 to 2015. Now, according to some estimates, Sri Lanka owes China over $10 billion. A large chunk of these loans were taken by the Rajapaksa government. What added to the crisis was their ill-timed policies. In 2019, President Gotabaya cut taxes. Sri Lanka's value-added tax was slashed by almost half. The government also began printing more money. Both of these policies backfired. While the pandemic has further battered the economy, many believe it was the policies that plunged Sri Lanka into its biggest economic crisis. And for more on this crisis, our correspondent Dasunia Thauda has sent us this report from Colombo.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, via a Gazette Extraordinary, declared a state of emergency here in Sri Lanka, which came into effect on the 1st of April and is in effect until further notice. Now, this concept of a state of emergency is not a new concept for Sri Lankans, as Sri Lanka was placed in a similar state of emergency in the year 2019 by then President Maithripala Sirisena, right after the April 21st terror attacks. Now, what this state of emergency entails is that it allows security officials to arrest and detain suspects, as well as enter and seize possessions of citizens across the country. That's not all. Any law that has been made during this state of emergency will not be questioned in a court of law.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.